All right, good morning, everyone. Hope everybody had a great weekend, got some rest. Before we hop into what we're going to be talking about today, just kind of wanted to give you some updates on some things. I believe that I've graded all of the assignment ones that have been submitted to me. If you take a look on Canvas, I try to leave comments on every one of them, as well as I fill out the rubric for every one of them. I do make mistakes. Sometimes I forget to click those rubric buttons, so if it looks like something was misclicked or not clicked, let me know so I can take a look at that and get it fixed up. Or if I missed your assignment for some reason, let me know so I can get that fixed up. But I think I got them all. I'm going to start grading assignment 2 this week. I would love to be able to say I'm going to get it finished this week, but I don't think I've got a very busy week, so I don't think that's super realistic. I think hopefully I'll have it done being graded by next week, but I'll keep you posted on that. And then just to kind of keep you generally aware of where things are going, we've got assignment 3 that is due next week. I know some of you have already started working on that, which is great. I did fix up the problems that I had in class regarding the timestamps on the commits. There were also a couple of the repositories that were marked private on accident instead of public. So if you were having troubles with some of the repos, this was all last Wednesday that I fixed this stuff. Take a look again. I did fix a couple of mistakes. Everything I believe is working now. I've had other students verify that they were able to do the assignment okay. So that all seems to be going well, but let me know if you run into any problems or need any help with assignment 3. Any questions about logistics or grading or anything like that before we hop into today's topic? All right. Fantastic. So today's going to start our first of what'll be 3, although we'll continue talking about it even beyond these 3 classes that are focused on the topic of clean code, or really code craftsmanship might be a better name for this little unit of the class. We're going to start focusing on not really how to write code that works well, but how to write code that we're actually proud of, code that we would actually want to show to somebody else. And so we really need to think about what does that mean, talk about what actually good code looks like, talk about that in a more formal way, which is what we're going to start doing today. And we're going to break it down into 3 primary topics, although this is not the only 3 things we could talk about, but we're going to start today by talking about naming. And then on Wednesday, we'll shift our focus to functions and methods. And then next week, 1 week from today, we'll wrap up our unit on code quality by talking about objects. So those are the main areas that we're going to focus on. And I just want to point out that I was greatly influenced by a book that is maybe a bit out of date perhaps these days, but I still think it's a useful reference for anybody who's interested on the topic. There's a book called Clean Code that I read when I was an undergrad. This book right here I think is fantastic. So if you're interested in craftsmanship, if you're interested in clean coding guidelines, clean coding techniques, especially in Java, the book is written with Java in mind, then I would highly recommend this book. Although even if you're interested in other languages, I would say a lot of the information is still relevant. So yeah, just a little plug for that book. But yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about clean code. I'm going to start today by kind of working through some notes about some clean coding ideas, and then we're going to apply them. We're actually going to put them into practice by working on some code. So first off, I'm just going to pull up a text editor. I'm not using the console too much today, the command line too much today. I'm going to use VS Code just because I've been liking VS Code lately. But of course, if you want to take notes in a different thing, that's totally fine. I completely understand. But yeah, I just want to take some notes about what clean code is. Why won't you zoom in? I thought it would zoom in on me. Sorry. Just trying to zoom this in so we could actually get the text a little bigger. There we go. Control Oh, okay. I was hitting the wrong hotkey. My bad. Yeah, so let's talk first about what actually clean code is and what we're actually looking for. We did talk about this a little bit at the beginning of class. These are going to kind of apply to all three of the topics that we're talking about. But what is our goal here? What is our ultimate goal here? I think for a lot of your classes, writing clean code is not the goal. I rate a lot of students' work. I can actually tell you for a fact that's not the goal. I see a lot of code that's not super clean. And I write a lot of code that's not super clean. So, if this is our goal, which it is in this class, this is our stated goal, then how does that change the way that we interact with our code? How does that change the way that we write code, et cetera, et cetera? So let's think about some criteria, some ways that we can use to talk about whether code is clean or not. We want our code to be focused. And generally, you'll hear this referred to as the one responsibility principle. It's a very famous one. Often applied to objects, but can be used in all sorts of ways to basically say, if I'm looking at a method or even a few lines of code, right, should do one thing. Should be focused on performing one thing. Should not be trying to juggle 5 different things at one time. Should try and keep things focused on the one thing that they're doing and do that one thing well. This applies to objects, this applies to methods, all of which we're going to be talking about. We want it to be readable. So we've definitely talked about this, but what does this actually mean? This means that we're going to sacrifice conciseness in a lot of ways. Our goal is not to cram as much code in as small a space as possible. Actually, if our goal is readability, it's kind of the opposite. We want to have important parts of the code expand and take up space so that we see them and are aware of them and understand what they represent and what their role is within the code. So we'll actually kind of start to see code get a little bit bigger, perhaps, if we're doing things properly. All of this is done with the goal in mind of trying to make it easier to update and maintain the code. So the idea here is that this code is not being written once, thrown out into the world, and then never looked at again. This code is being written once, and then somebody else, maybe even yourself, is going to come back later on at some point in the future and have to add things to it, or fix bugs, or do other kinds of things that we're used to doing with our code. So we want to write our code to make it easier on that person in the future, who again might be us. We want to make it easier on ourselves. This is a big one, but hard to do. No duplication. We don't want to duplicate code ever. Now, I'm as guilty as probably everybody in this room of grabbing code and copying and pasting it in certain areas when I feel like I don't want to take the time to set it up and do it right. But that's not going to fly in this class. We're going to, take the time to clean up our code, make it easier, and remove all that duplication, which is, I think, an important point to make. I'm sitting here telling you that I have all of these negative code quality things that I do, and I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you that for a reason. The reason is not to try and dissuade you from ever doing those things. I think some of that's just human nature, right? Some of it is just, I want to get this done. I'm going to take the shortest, easiest path to do it, and if that means hard coding something in, then, oh well, that's a thing that happens all the time. You're not going to be the first or the last person to have that urge when you're writing code. The point I'm trying to make here is that, okay, after we do that and everything's up and running and working well, we got to go back and we got to clean it up. So we actually have to apply these standards to our code. This is not something that just naturally happens. People don't naturally write code that is nice and readable and clean and easy to understand. Maybe sometimes we do, especially if we're focused on that and trained on these kinds of concepts. But in general, I'd say that's not true. We actually write code that's messy, that's held together by duct tape, and then we actually need to go back and purposefully clean it up. So that's kind of what we're working on in terms of this class. So let's talk about today's topic, which is naming, and then we'll open up some code and try to apply some of these rules that I'm talking about. What makes good names? Well, actually, first off, let's describe the context here. I'm talking about naming in a few different levels. Yes, variable names matter, but also method names matter, right? object names matter. We as programmers get to choose the names of things quite often. It's a pretty standard part of programming. It's a very important one. I think most people are aware of, names should be meaningful, they should describe the thing that is being named. But there are some other rules, I think, that are worth keeping in mind when you're naming things to pay attention to. So we want to, when we're naming things, especially in Java, we're going to use camel case for variables, right? That means that it starts out as lowercase, but if there's a second or third or fourth word, then we capitalize any words that come after that. And then there's its cousin, where we'll often see this used for objects within Java especially. We will capitalize any objects. Maybe I shouldn't use object as a thing, right? But if I'm dealing with object names, we capitalize the first letter as well. And that's actually a very helpful clue to us if we're writing Java code, for example, to tell whether something represents an object or not, to see if that first letter is capitalized. Notice also that parts of speech are useful to us, so we can try and use our knowledge of human languages to help us master computer languages. Variables and objects should always be nouns. Variables and objects should always be nouns. So if I'm making the name of a new class in Java, that class should be a noun. Always, always, always. Same thing for variables. We'll talk next week about the distinction between the two. When should something just be a variable versus make a whole class, make a whole object? That's a topic for a future conversation. For methods or functions, these should be verbs. Methods and functions are behaviors, they're actions. They should do something, right? So we want these to be verbs. What is the action taking place? What is the behavior that is taking place that this method is enacting for us? We want to avoid certain things when naming. There are these general words that pop up all the time in variable names. You've probably seen them. I definitely have used them before. But they're often redundant. They take up space and don't really lend a whole lot to the descriptive part. So I'm talking about things like If I say a thing, right? That might be a parameter name or a variable name. But that letter A is just worthless. Tell me what the thing is. Or the word the. Putting the word the in a variable name, the thing. Also, extra space that doesn't add anything. Those three characters are just extra typing that somebody has to do when they want to refer to that variable. So avoid the, and then some other ones that might be a little bit more controversial, right? Info, data, or perhaps even more controversial still, array, right? List. Got to be careful with these. Some of you may disagree with these, and actually I'm probably guilty of using these last two far more often than any of the other ones on the list. But keep in mind that you are, especially in Java, but also in other languages, the type of the thing is clear. You're telling me what the type of the variable is already. I can see that it's an array just from the square brackets on the type definition, or I can see that it's a list because that's what you told me it was, right? So we don't need to also include that piece of information in the name of the variable itself. It just takes up space and is redundant. It tells us something that we already know. Other things to keep in mind. Let your variable names be long. This is counterintuitive to a lot of us who are thinking about, oh, I'm going to have to type this variable a bajillion different times. And that may be true, right? It may require you to type a little bit more but the description, the extra description is worth it. Now, one kind of way you can play around with this, recall our good friend the for loop, and one of the variables that we use often with for loops is I, right? So that's a very short variable name, but a lot of times that's actually okay. First off, I has been used basically since the beginning of computing itself to represent that loop variable, so it's just very well known. But also, we let the scope dictate the length of the name. Meaning that if I have a variable that is important enough to last across a big chunk of my code, then I better take the time to describe that variable really well, because it's going to pop up in a lot of different contexts, in a lot of different places. If I'm writing a for loop and I use I as the loop variable, but it only exists within the body of that for loop, then who cares, right? That's quite clearly just a loop variable, just a traditional loop variable. Nobody's going to question the usage of that. Using a single letter variable name for something that's important. Again, I'm guilty of this, right? Int x. Well, give me more information. Give me more information than that. Perhaps if you're talking about a coordinate system, that would be an appropriate name. But in almost all other contexts, that's not enough. That's not enough information. That's not a good variable name. We also want to avoid using repetitive names. And the classic way that this pops up is, okay, I have a variable called x, x2, x3, x4, right? Oh, I already made a variable with this name. Let me just tack a 2 on the end of it. No, that's a bad habit. Again, one that I've found myself involved with in past code writing exercises, but we don't want variables with numbers on the end. That number does not serve any useful purpose to us other than just allowing us to reuse the variable name, which you can think of as directly contrary to what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make variable names that are distinct, useful, for identifying information. If it's just a number on the end, then I'm reusing the same name to refer to two different things. That's not distinct at all. That's not descriptive. That's not a good variable name. So try and think of another way to get across that piece of information as well. Cool. I think we've covered most of what I wanted to discuss. Let's hop into some code. And before I do that, I actually want to bring your attention to Canvas. I made a repository for us to work on that has some clean code examples and exercises in it. And I would like for you all to have a copy of this repository as well. And by have a copy of it, I mean you can clone a copy on your computer if you actually want to make your own copy that you can modify and keep. You know, in GitHub, you're welcome to create a fork if you want to, but it's really not necessary, I don't think. I'm not going to grade these or anything like that. It's just for practice purposes. So up to you what you would like to do. If you want to make a fork, you can. If you just want to come and grab the link here, that'll be enough to allow you to make a clone on your computer and follow along with me as I walk through the examples and the exercises. But I also wanted to show you something else, a little bit different. In 131, we teach people how to take this link and put it into Eclipse and import projects into Eclipse. And you can definitely do it that way. I'm not going to complain if some of you already started doing that and setting it up that way. But I actually want to show you that we can do it a little bit differently. And this is something that does come in handy. It's useful. If I want to, I can use the command line to go in and make a clone of this repository, which I'll do in just a second once I get to the proper directory. So if I say git clone and do it this way, it will actually, of course, make the clone. But then the question is, okay, I want to actually open this up. This is the first time, I think, all semester that I'm going to open up Eclipse and try and modify some code inside of an IDE. I don't really want to use Vim for this because I want all of the extra stuff that Eclipse provides to me. But how do I get this repository into Eclipse if I'm doing things this way? Well, let me show you that. I'll fire up Eclipse here. By the way, well, this is sort of another tangent, but I like talking about it because a lot of times students will just instinctively skip this and move on to the next. Workspaces are intended to help you keep stuff organized. I usually make a new workspace for each semester, and then every semester all of the assignments and stuff that I work on are just in that workspace. And if I ever want to see what I did last spring, I can just pull up last spring's workspace, and all of my stuff will still be there. So it's kind of a nice way to help you organize your stuff. If you want to, you don't have to. You can just dump it all into one, of course, if that's what you'd like to do. But let me go ahead and open this up. Just going to take a second. And once it opens, instead of following the traditional import process, I'm going to tell it that I already have this Eclipse project. This .project file is actually what contains the Eclipse project. And if you're thinking about, well, what the heck's actually in there? I mean, you can actually take a look at it if you want to on GitHub. There's no reason for us not to talk about this. It has the name of the project. It has some information about the fact that we're using Java. That's really about it. There's actually not a whole lot of information in here. But that is what Eclipse needs. And so instead of doing the import from Git, which again, if you did it that way, that's not a problem. But since I'm doing it a little differently, I'm going to go up to import under the general folder. There's one that says existing projects into workspace. Or you could also look at this one, which will pull some files in from the file system. I'm going to do this one though, and then click the browse button and go to where I cloned the repository, which is going to be in my documents, CSE237, and here it is, the naming repository. So just select the folder that you cloned on the command line, and it should find the stuff that's in there and pop it up. So we actually used tools other than the Git import process. And the nice thing about doing that, actually, one of the nice things about doing that is that we can mix and match. If I want to do Git stuff through Eclipse, a lot of us know how to commit and push through Eclipse because that's what we taught people to do in 131. We can actually still do that. Eclipse is still smart enough to know that this is a Git repository, and it'll still let us perform the Git and push if we want to, or I can go and do it from the command line. I have the option. I have the option to do it either through my IDE or through the command line directly. But let's take a look at some code and see if we can apply some naming to these examples. I'm going to start with the one in the naming.example, and then eventually I'll turn you loose on these exercises a little bit later on in class today. I'm going to open up this example called dice. We're going to take a look and see that, there is some stuff in here, but it doesn't appear to be named very well. This is an actual, we don't give this assignment in the intro class anymore, but we used to give this as an assignment in our introductory class. It was phased out 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember exactly when this was phased out. The interesting thing though is that I think this code mostly works, but oops, actually it doesn't. There's an index out of bounds exception here, and where? It tells me it's on line 18. Okay, but how does it happen? How does that exception actually take place? It's hard to tell because these variable names are all poorly done. Very, very poorly done. I think some of them are probably okay, but others do not give enough context, do not give enough information. You might be able to guess at what some of these represent. So this one's, the letter D, of course, probably stands for dice. I mean, we see the dice is the name of the class. This is trying to simulate rolling some dice. We're playing Yahtzee, right? But that's hard to tell. That's information that I know because I've given this assignment so many times. It's hard to tell just from looking at it. And so, our task is to try and rename these variables and see if in doing so, we can find where this issue and maybe some other issues potentially pop up in this code. And so you might start thinking to yourself, oh, renaming this D variable is going to be a big pain in the butt. It shows up everywhere in the code. If you highlight it, it actually shows you everywhere that it appears in the code. But the good news is that we can use Eclipse to help us. A lot of what we're doing falls under the category of refactoring. Anybody recall what refactoring means? Can somebody give me a quick definition of refactoring? I know it's a little early in the morning to be talking about such things. Yeah. So, yeah, so find and replace is definitely along the lines of what we're going for, but you have to be careful because will literally find and replace all letter D's. So if I wanted to, replace all lowercase letter D's with the word dice, then it will do that. But notice that it did that not just for the variable that I cared about, but also this other variable. So maybe I didn't want to change the name of that variable. Or if there was another variable name that happened to have a lowercase d in it, it would also get that replaced. And you can see that I now have, I forgot to, the word void has a lowercase d. So, that's actually a kind of a good first step. You have to be careful about how you use it. And the point I'm trying to make is that Eclipse can help us out. Eclipse is smart enough that if we come down here to the refactor menu, let me back up for a second. I highlighted this, so I highlighted the variable, right-clicked on it, went down to refactor, and then there's a rename option. If I select this option, it's a little hard to see on my screen maybe, but everywhere that this variable appears in the code has a box drawn around it, and as I type the name of the variable, you'll see that name of the variable gets substituted in. But notice that down here, this D2 variable remains untouched. I'm not renaming that variable right now. I'm renaming this variable right here. Right? That's a very useful tool for refactoring your code. I don't have to track down every single place that variable shows up. Eclipse is smart enough to figure that out for me. So I can just change the name like this. But let's talk about this name for a second. I actually don't think this name is quite descriptive enough. It's better. Almost any single letter variable name is going to be bad. If I see any single letter variable names in your all's code on the project at the end of the semester, with few exceptions, I'm going to be like, that's not good. We got to get rid of those single letter variable names. So this is better, but it's still, I don't think, quite good enough. I don't think it quite describes exactly what this value represents. There are in fact 4 dice, but we're playing a game of Yahtzee here, and I see 2 loops, one of which uses this dice. So I think what's actually happening is that I'm rolling this number of dice many times, right? So I have 4 dice and I'm rolling them, it looks like R number of times. So really what this represents is the number of dice per throw. I think that's probably what I would prefer as a more descriptive variable name. If I don't include that per throw on the end, somebody could look at this and think, oh, that's the total number of dice that gets thrown, right? And that's not an unreasonable interpretation of just that word dice. It's not descriptive enough. Also notice that this is a variable that appears throughout this entire piece of code. So using our prior, kind of guidelines, it should be a longer name. Variables that last longer should have longer names, more descriptive names, than variables that are only making brief appearances. This R variable represents the number of throws that we're making. So I'm going to roll 4 dice 7 times and keep track of the results that I rolls of those rolls. Okay, so really this should also be renamed to indicate what it represents. Let's refactor that into something like number of throws or number of rolls, something like that. You can already start to see some side effects. I've only changed 2 variable names so far, right? But you can already start to see some side effects. Notice that these 2 lines got significantly longer. Some of that's just I'm using bigger font so that you all can read the font easier. But even with normal size font, right? The code is going to get longer. It's going to take up more space. That's a good thing. It's providing more information. Here's a classic one. Using array as the name of an array. I know it's an array. This part of the code right here tells me that it's an array. I don't need to also tell you the array. So really, what does this represent? It's a table. It's a table. I would call it a throw table, right? It's keeping track of all the throws that I make. So you're also welcome to disagree with me. I think naming, as I've already kind of mentioned, is subjective. Some names are better than others, but not everyone's going to agree with you on which names are better than others. So if you think that you have a better name, by all means. And then this one, F, it's a little bit unclear what this is supposed to represent. I might actually put a pin in that for now and see if I can't come back to it a little bit later after I look at some of the rest of the code, maybe fix some of the bugs. We can already see, right, this loop becomes a lot easier to understand when I have that variable name in there. I, by the way, I think that's fine. And J also, those are variables that are only lasting for the length of the loop. So having them be the traditional I and J is not a problem here. But these need to be updated. First we have to figure out what they are, or what they represent. So if I look at this one here, it's doing something in this chunk of code. And since we've already renamed a bunch of these variables, it's a little bit easier to tell what's going on here. Can anybody see what this code is doing? Can anybody describe to me in English what that code looks like it's doing? Comparing this value to the one next to it for all of the dice that have been thrown. Well, it's trying to compute, it looks like Yahtzees when all of them are the same. I think there might be a bug though. We'll have to check that out. I think this one should be renamed to indicate the number of Yahtzees that have been thrown. So number of Yahtzees. Which even Yahtzees is kind of a tricky one. That's the name of a game, right? If you were born and grew up in the United States of America, you probably played that game. Other places, I'm not so confident about that fact. So, renaming this to something even more general still. Number, let's see, how would we name that? Throws. All dice equal count? Something like that, maybe? I don't know. It's a little hard for me to think about how I would describe that without using the word Yahtzee, to be honest with you. It's a tricky one. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be straightforward. This S one I see is only really used within here, and actually there's a big hint here telling me that it's the sum. Okay, so that should be an easy one for us to refactor. This is going to be sum of throw, right? Or sum of dice. I would also accept. I mean, I think there's some wiggle room there. And I think we're almost done. There's only a couple of variables that we haven't really touched, including this F1, which I still haven't quite figured out yet. There's this D2 one, which is a very bad variable name. Not only is it kind of single letter, but it's numbered, so not a great look. But let's think about what this is for. This is an individual die throw, right? So I see the math.random over here. This is one die being rolled. So we could rename that to reflect that fact. die roll, something like that. And now let's see if we can't start to fix some of these mistakes. Now that we've changed these variable names, except for this one, which I do want to come back and look at. Let's see if we can't fix some of these mistakes. We saw that there was an index out of bounds on line 18 here. I can see that this array is made to have the number of throws as the rows and then the number of dice as the columns, the number of columns. But then if I look at the loops, I see that the first loop, I, which is being plugged in, is going based on the number of dice and not the number of throws. Do you see that? So that's a mistake. I got my loops backwards. This one should be up here, and this one should be down here. I'm making the claim, I'm making the argument that that would have been a lot harder for us to figure out with the variable names left in their current state, in the state that they originally got to us in. Let's try this code again now that I made that simple fix. All I did was switch these two to make it match the way that this was defined. I guess you could have also switched them up here if you wanted to, I suppose, to change the way your array looks. All right, so closer, I see, this roll is always 4. That's a little weird, right? And it's telling me the sum is 9. That's also a little weird, right? It's got to be something that's not quite working out. Oh, look at this. System.out.print dice per throw? Well, wait a second. I wanted to print out what actually got rolled. Remember that before, this variable was called D and the other one was called D2. Very easy to confuse those two variables. They're so close together. But now that I've expanded this out, I can see, oh, this shouldn't be the dice per throw. This should be what actually got rolled. This should be the die roll. Again, another problem that's just not easy to spot without good variable names. And so now, this looks much better. 4 plus 5 plus 1 plus 1, that is 11. That is good. So I seem to have fixed some of the problems here. But what about this one now? So now I see that, we've got an issue here. And it looks like it actually has to do with this, right? If I'm comparing all of the dice here, I need to stop one sooner. I need to stop one sooner than this. I think I need to put a -1 to stop me from going off the edge, since I have j plus 1 inside of the brackets here. Let's try that and see if we can actually get this code to run. Well, we're getting closer. We fixed a lot of issues. Oh, but I see another one that's popped up. Properly computes this as being 11, but this one, it says the sum is 23. Well, that's not right. And also, how did I roll a 0? That's also not right. Some other places for us to look. Oh, wait. Here I see sum of throw is being declared outside of both of the loops. But actually, the sum of the throw should be reset to go back to 0 at the beginning of each throw. So this code's in the wrong place. This code needs to go here. And as far as being able to roll zeros, I can tell that this is where the die is being rolled. And if I look at the way that this is done, that can give me 0, right? And 0 times 7 is going to be 0. So yeah, it's actually not done properly. I think the proper way to roll this, I know it's been a while, if you haven't taken 131 in a little while, it's been a while since you thought about generating random numbers, but I think this is a more proper way to roll a number between 1 and 6. Let's try that. See if we have any more error. Oh, wow. Awesome. So here I see I've made it successfully through 1142. That's sum is 8. That's correct, yeah. All the sums look to be correct. And then It tells me there were 3 Yahtzees 3 times when they were all the same. That's not true. So that didn't work, unfortunately. We have to look at that. And then what's this down here? This is saying that 1 appeared 0 times. Oh, okay, so it's telling me how many times the sums appeared. It looks to be computing them correctly. This is that last variable that I didn't rename because I wanted to see kind of what it's doing first. But now it looks like, oh yeah, it's another table. It's a frequency table tracking how many times the sums appear. So let's think about how we would rename this final variable here. We could call it frequency of sums. I kind of like that. It doesn't actually need to have the word table in it. I guess you could put the word table in it if you want to. But I think that's a pretty good name. Makes this line look a lot more clear. And then really, this is the last thing that's broken. It's supposed to be checking for the case when all of them have the same value. So I rolled all 4s, or I rolled all 3s. But the way that this is written, it's comparing the 2 neighbors and then saying, oh, if the 2 neighbors are the same, I'm going to bump that up. So like for this example right here, since these 2 are the same, it would say that's a Yahtzee. Well, that's actually not a Yahtzee. All of these need to be the same. This is a logic error. Actually, when we gave this assignment, this is one of the hardest parts of this assignment for our intro students. But the way that I often would express this is, you know, a Yahtzee occurs when the first die, the die in position 0, is equivalent to all of the die. So we can actually tweak this a little bit, I think, like so. There are other solutions too, but I started this loop to go from 1 to the end and compared all of them against the die in position 0. I think that should fix our... Nope, I still didn't fix it. Oh, because this needs to... Got it. I've skipped a step. We're only counting the Yahtzees if this is true for all of them. So we're actually looking for... What do we need? We need a counter or a Boolean, or we need another variable here, I feel like, to do this properly. So let's... I'm going to put in a Boolean because I think it's good to talk about naming Boolean variables. Let's see. When naming Boolean variables, they almost always start with is or are all the same, right? I kind of don't like this, are all what the same. And there's that word the that I said shouldn't be there. So that's actually not a good variable name. Let me try again. All dice equal. There we go. I kind of like that one a little bit better. I'm going to assume that they are equal. All right, I tweaked this code a lot. And then I'll come down here. There we go. I think that'll fix it. There might be other solutions to the problem. I did change this code quite a bit, but if I lost you somewhere along the way, I'm sorry about that. I know I was going a little bit fast, just trying to explain my thought process. But really the more important takeaway here is that this rework that I did would have been such a pain without first doing all the work that we did to identify the variables, name them properly, and provide a lot more description to the code itself. I believe this will be functioning though, and I'm happy to leave it up here on the screen if you want to try and take it down. But again, the functioning of the code is not really my main concern here. I'm more concerned that these are named appropriately, and I believe that's going to do it for this example. Does anybody have any questions about the changes that I made, or does anybody have any potential disagreements with the changes I made? Feelings at all? It does make things bigger, right? That's probably the one complaint that I hear the most is like, ugh, this is a really long variable name, and you're not wrong. That is a really long variable name, but that's, I think, much better than the opposite, having two short variable names that don't convey any information at all. And so what I would like to do for the time that we have remaining, which is about a little over half an hour, there are two more files in the naming exercises package. This first one is called Gambler's Ruin, and those of you who took 131 or maybe are TAing 131 as we speak are very familiar with this problem. This is a studio from 131, but I butchered it. This is my solution, and I went and I wrecked all the variable names. There are no bugs, so I didn't put any, at least not any intentional mistakes. There could be some unintentional ones. So unlike the last example, there's nothing for you to fix besides the names. So I want you to try the concepts that we just did. Take a few minutes, talk to your neighbors, and then I'd like to have a conversation about the variable names you chose. I'll probably regroup you around a little before 11 o'clock, and I'll be around if you have any questions, need any help. Oh, I see. Yeah. I'd like to chat about this one for a bit, maybe get some feedback from you all in terms of what variable names you chose. Actually, kind of starting with this one, which I'm willing to bet a good chunk of you maybe just passed right on over. Did anybody rename that one? Ah, you did. Interesting. Yeah. What did you call it? I'm sorry? Input scanner? I think that's a little bit better than what's here, but I think it is important to rename this one, and this is another of the many rules that I've told you about today that I'm guilty of breaking. I do this all the time. But I think the problem where I've run into this, especially, is if I'm using multiple scanners, which is definitely a thing that can happen. If I have lots of different files, I can use scanners to be pulling information out of different files within my code, and then I need to know which scanner is which. Am I reading from the file? Am I reading from the whatever they're typing in? What is this scanner reading from? Should be the name of this variable. So even though it's the only one in this scenario, you're probably not going to get confused by which scanner it is. I still think it's a good habit to get into giving this a more descriptive name. What is this? This is keyboard input, right? This is input coming from the keyboard. This is stuff that the user is typing in. Now when I see that scanner later on in the code, I have no question about what I am scanning from. It's not a file at all. It's the keyboard. We're going to talk about files, actually. That's a topic on our agenda to discuss next week, I believe. And so we'll have more to say about that when we get to that conversation. But for now, I think naming your scanners more descriptive is a good thing as well. Let's get down to some of these. These, I think, are hopefully a bit more straightforward. Anybody want to volunteer what they renamed this S variable to be? Yeah. Start amount is probably the classic, especially this one. You get the big fat hints right here in the prompts that are given. I think start amount's probably fine. It's certainly a lot better than S. The only thing that you might want to consider clarifying, amount of what, right? So I'm talking, it may or may not be clear what we're talking about in this example. We're talking about doing some gambling. So am I talking about dollars? Am I talking about, yen, peso? What am I talking about? What amount of what? I know we probably assume dollars, but that may not always be a safe assumption to make. So considering putting the actual unit on there might be useful, or it might be extra clunky. I think start amount is probably fine. Anybody have strong disagreements, strong feelings? And then for the next one, did anybody have anything besides win chance here? Or is that mostly what people decided to go with? I see some people nodding. Yeah, I mean, that seems like another pretty good, I'm in the wrong menu. Seems like another pretty good choice here. Chance of winning is almost the same thing, just said a little bit differently. That's also okay, right? And then the win amount is what this one is being described as. But actually, let's take a look and see where this is being used down here at the bottom. So W2, right? When I say win amount, I think this is the only place it's being used other than places where it gets printed. Oh, it is being used to compute some math down here as well. this is one where I think, you know, win amount is better. Of course, better than the terrible name that's here. But I think we could be even better still. This is the maximum amount that I am gonna be willing to win before I call it quits and go home. So I think that maximum is maybe an important piece of information to convey here. Max win amount might be slightly more preferable, but again, it is somewhat subjective. You may disagree. And then this is the last of the ones that you got really good clues for before we have to start doing a little bit more investigative work to try and figure out what these variables represent. This one says number of days, and actually I would say days is better, right? Should we include number of in the time? I don't know, actually. That's one where I feel like days is maybe almost explanatory enough. You can, yeah, I have a hard time deciding between variable names sometimes myself. It's not always 100% clear. It's always okay to get somebody else's opinion on it, though, and see what they think. Or decide that you were wrong and come back and change it later when you think of a better variable name. That's also a very viable option. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of these awful variable names down here and see if we can't figure out a little bit more about what's going on. So if I take a look, I may not do them in order, right? If I look down here, I can see, oh, there's chance of winning, and there's that comment there that is very helpful for me to indicate that I'm going to win if this W3 value is less than my chance of winning. So, okay, that means that this represents, you know, playing the game, right? Whatever value the game has given to me. So let's rename that to reflect game outcome, right? This is the outcome of the game that I'm playing. Whatever that game that might be at the casino. And then I can see that from here, P2 goes up if I win and goes down if I lose. So to me, that indicates that that's my current amount of cash, right? It's not my starting amount, it's my current amount of cash. In fact, we can see that reflected here. There's their start amount being set to P2 at the beginning of every day. So it's resetting it back to the start amount. That's my current amount of cash. So that's a better name for P2. You could leave it as current amount. I suppose that's fine. All right. What is F telling us? Somebody want to tell me what they used for this Boolean F for a variable name? Maybe you didn't get that far. Did you have one? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what the F is for. They fail. It's called Gambler's Ruin. So, and we can see down here that R goes up by 1. So this is the number of times I've busted, basically, the number of times I've ruined. Where ruining is when I run out of money. If I have run out of money, then I had a bad day. I'm counting how many bad days I have. How many times am I going to go bust? So this is, you know, did I fail today? We can refactor that. Failed today. But this variable represents the total number of times that I've failed. So we need to update that accordingly, this R value up here. So yeah, I mean, you could, whoops, hit the wrong button. You could say it as total days failed, or, you know, it could just be times ruined, right? Something like that. I think there's a few potential options here. I like total days failed. But if you disagree with me, you are certainly allowed. If you pick a different name, that doesn't necessarily mean your name is bad. Just means You picked a slightly different name. P is going to represent, so you see P is going up, it looks like whether I win or lose. So P goes up no matter what, which means that P is reflecting how many times I play the game. Right? Win or lose, it's just the total number of times I play the game. So we can refactor this. Whoa, I hit the wrong button again, sorry about that. Refactor this as, why does it keep doing that? Or is it me? Is it a me problem? All right, I got it this time. Number of plays. We could say today if we wanted to be even more specific, right? Because it could be confused with the total number of plays over the entire simulation across all days. So it might be worthwhile to be even more specific and say that this is the number of plays for today specifically. And we're almost there. I think there's really just a few left to do. Here's one where I think that while keeping it as I is not necessarily bad, and I talked about how I is a classic loop variable name, well, I actually represent something meaningful in this code. It's not just a loop count. It's not just a loop counter in this code. It actually represents, what day are we on? It's the current day. And so if that's the case, I actually think that, well, I is not necessarily bad in certain loop contexts, but if I can make it more descriptive, right, I want to do that. So I think this is useful. We can see that does get substituted in here and makes this line of code a little bit more readable. And then these ones down here I think are probably the hardest out of the entire example to determine. We're computing what's called the ruin rate in two different ways. One by simulating it, and one by just using a mathematical formula. And this part down at the bottom is the mathematical formula part. So RR here stands for ruin rate. I think that's probably what this one should be refactored into. This is the expected ruin rate down here based on the formula. So alpha actually is a term from the formula, and I think of all the variable names that you were given to start with, this one's actually kind of okay. Alpha stands for a term within the formula, but this should be renamed, should not be a single letter name. This is the expected ruin rate. And actually there's another one down here that's also the expected ruin rate that should be refactored. You could maybe refactor this chunk of code a little bit more to get rid of one of these ifs or elses, I suppose, but the way that it's currently written, for just renaming variables, I would do it something like that. And I would also say that while this example doesn't have it, right, this is another good time to point out that if I am doing some mathematical formula in my code, if I come back and look at this later, it's a little tricky for me to, I could reverse engineer this formula, but it might also be nice for me to just drop in a comment here with the actual formula, right? So that I can double check that against the code if I need to verify that any of the changes that I made broke something, right? I want to make sure the code still works. Right now, you just kind of have to take my word for it that the code has been written properly. If there were bugs, it would be hard to debug this without knowing what the original formula is. So I think that's a good example of maybe dropping a comment to let yourself and other people know what this code is supposed to be doing, other than just trusting it and taking someone's word that it's working properly so that you can actually verify yourself. But I think we've changed every single variable with the exception of alpha. And again, notice that like the previous example, it takes up more space. But I'm arguing that that's not our primary concern. The amount of space our code takes up is very low on our list of priorities in this class. I care about readability, and readable code is always going to take up more space than code that is Well, not always necessarily, but in a lot of cases, I would say readable code is going to take up more space than code that is, in fact, unreadable. Are there any questions about this exercise before we move on to the next one? So I don't know if we'll have time to do this full exercise today because we're almost out of time, but we can at least get started. I want to at least kind of walk you through it real quick, and maybe we'll pick up where we left off on Wednesday's class by walking through this one as a little review. But this one, yes, the variable names are a problem. This is a class, so we have instance variables, but the same rules apply. Those are still variables. They should still have descriptive variable names. These are not. These are bad variable names. But also pay attention to the fact that this class name is very bad, intentionally so, right? I think part of the goal for this one is trying to figure out what this is and renaming the class appropriately. I'm going to leave that as a little open puzzle for you to see if you can figure out what this class is, what it represents, and what a better class name would be. But also pay attention, besides the variable names and the parameter names, which need to be addressed, these method names are kind of okay, but not really the best. So take a look at the method names for this example as well. Not just the variable names, but I also want you to take a crack at the method names and the class name for this one. I'm going to give you the rest of the time to do this. We only have 10 minutes left. I'm not going to have time to go through the whole thing, so we'll plan to review this one at the beginning of Wednesday's class as a nice little review before we hop into the next one. So yeah, spend the last few minutes just going through this. I'll be around if you have any questions or need any help, and otherwise, I'll see you on Wednesday.